We now move to the next segment and now more
Thank
about
you,
the
Shalini.
business side of AVGC. We have a very comprehensive overview on AVGC industry. We'll tell you about the state of industry, and we have thus Mr. Girish Menon, Head of Media and Entertainment Vertical Deal Advisory at KPMG India. Girish is going to give us a very comprehensive presentation on the state of AVGC industry. Over to you, Girish.
Thank you so much and welcome everybody to the CII Summit FX 2021. Today, I want to take some time to actually think through and talk through some of the key changes and key implications that the pandemic has had on the animation, VFX and gaming industry, but also take a look ahead to what are the key themes and trends that are driving this sector as we look forward into the future. Next slide, please. The pandemic obviously affected the media and entertainment sector pretty badly. When the lockdown started in March 20, but that was not unusual. It actually had a wide impact across the economy and across multiple sectors. And what that actually meant is that the media and entertainment sector actually saw a degrowth in FY21, almost about 20% to reach about 1,400 billion rupees. And this was really on the back of the significant disruptions, both on the demand side and the supply side that happened during this period. But if you step back a second, the media and entertainment sector in particular was already under a lot of stress because of a weak economy, and the pandemic only sort of worsened the situation in that sense. What this effectively meant for us is when you start looking at the impact, in a very simplified term, our sense was when we did this exercise last year, we probably lost out about 2 years of growth, and we would have needed, maybe 2 years before we could have reached back to the pre-pandemic levels of size and scale and demand for the business, right? But what was also interesting when you look at the media entertainment sector, unlike most other sectors, is that parts and some of the sub-segments actually saw strong demand, strong pickup, and actually managed to grow in this period, right? And this was largely on the back of digital and digital-driven businesses. So you had segments like music and audio streaming, OTT, and video streaming. You had sectors obviously like gaming, all of which, because of the lockdowns and the work from home, behavior and habit formation, there was a lot of consumption of digital content that started happening during this phase, right? Which effectively meant that these segments saw a strong growth, and gaming, like I said, being one of them. But there are, segments like animation and VFX also actually had a positive impact, keeping the supply chain disruptions aside. On the demand side, there was a positive impact because of the increasing demand from digital and OTT players for animation content in particular, and for greater investments into production quality on the platforms, effectively meant greater investments in VFX also. This effectively is something that has actually helped the animation VFX industry and supported this segment in a time where of great uncertainty in terms of the supply chain disruptions. And as we progress through the pandemic during last year, post the festive season, once supply chain disruptions sort of settled down, people figured a way of operating in the new normal. Demand started picking up again, and by Feb 21, the estimation was that we were coming back to pre-pandemic levels of demand, and that actually augured well for the M&E sector as a whole. Unfortunately, the second wave actually again has created significant uncertainties. But what is different this time is that most organizations have realized that this is something that is here to stay, and are now figuring out ways to operate both on the supply side and the demand side in this kind of an environment, which effectively meant that while a lot of the growth has become subdued, the impact is probably not as as high as it was during the first phase of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So when you look at the animation and VFX sector, what has been some of the key implications of the pandemic, right? I think there are some, and particularly when you look at the challenges that the industry faced, I think the first quarter of FY21 and part of the second quarter definitely saw some significant operational disruptions as organizations figured out how to transition from a work from home model, and also more importantly how to deliver the kind of quality work that was needed from a work from home model, right? This obviously took some time and some learning and some trial and error, but organizations figured that out over time, and this is now something that a hybrid model, particularly in these sectors, is something that we are seeing increasingly becoming operational. But on the flip side, while a lot of the larger organizations and larger studios were able to weather this storm, a lot of the smaller studios actually ended up facing severe stress, and we've seen some shutdowns and potentially even more closures as we move forward during this phase. The third angle, particularly on the demand side, which is had a big impact in that phase, was while supply chain disruptions on the delivery side got sorted, pipeline actually got impacted, right? Which effectively meant that a lot of the demand that was coming in, particularly from global markets, slowed down significantly. Either because of projects getting delayed or getting either stalled or cancelled. This also meant that even for the existing deliveries, there were situations where contracts were getting renegotiated, commercials were getting renegotiated, all of which placed pressure both not only on the top line but also on the bottom line for a lot of organizations and a lot of studios. What is on the VFX side also, what was interesting is that as live action shoots again got disrupted, that it has effectively meant that a lot of the VFX work on this also got put on hold or delayed as things move forward, both from an India perspective as well as global perspective. Next slide, please. That being said, it was the pandemic has not been the only source of uncertainty or challenge for the animation and VFX sector, right? This sector has been grappling with a few other issues which are sort of endemic in nature and need to be resolved as we go forward, right? And some of these key elements that we see are, I think the core of all of this is basically development of skill sets and institutions to train talent in a formalized model at scale is something that needs to be built up and developed over time, and that's something that's lacking at this point. We are starting to see a lot of the emerging nations, both particularly in Southeast Asia, becoming in serious competition to India when it comes to both price and quality outputs that are provided, and that's actually sort of hurting India's cost arbitrage and impacting the demand for the India market. The other point is that as Indian studios start focusing on scaling up and going up the value chain in terms of quality of output, what one realizes is that the balance of power continues to be with the foreign studios, and that actually, particularly in co-production models, and that actually means that it's something that needs to change, and over time as we build scale, I think that's something that will evolve. But at this point, that is a challenge which a lot of studios are grappling with. The other challenge is that historically animation VFX as a space is largely composed of a lot of small studios, right? Which effectively meant that building scale has been a challenge for a lot of these studios, and therefore raising funds and therefore scaling up has been something a lot of these studios are grappling with. And in situations like last year, where there was a significant demand uncertainty, it did affect a lot of the smaller studios very adversely. A quick point also on the kids content and the monetization of the kids content in particular. That saw a negative impact last year when YouTube came out with a policy of not allowing targeted advertising on for kids content on their channels, which effectively did have an adverse impact on the revenue generation from for those channels and therefore the related content. Can we go to the next slide, please? That being said, when you look at what has changed, right? So obviously the pandemic did create uncertainty, but during this phase, we have also started to see changes in supply chain and other evolution happen, which augurs very well for the industry as we go forward, right? I think one of the key elements is that there is an increased focus on domestic IP production, and particularly for animation content, and largely coming in from the demand from both Indian OTT platforms and TV channels. This is over and above the global OTT platforms who are also building a scale when it comes to building their animation libraries. Even on the India side, we're actually seeing greater investments in domestic IP creation, and that's actually helping support the growth in the animation industry. The second angle, both when it comes to VFX and animation, is that with this, the disruption in live action, and particularly with the multiple waves that have happened, and therefore the multiple lockdowns across the world, it has been very difficult to have a sustained, content creation pipeline for live action content. What this has meant is that, content creators are relooking at, at their supply chains and are focusing. Both platforms and creators and studios are focusing a lot more on animated content, given that there the supply chains are more easier to manage. As also even on the VFX side, where a lot of location requirements are actually now being replaced through VFX, and that again is helping drive growth in VFX requirements also. And our sense is that these kind of changes in supply chain are here to stay and will definitely support both the animation and VFX industry as we go forward. Both in on the other hand, co-productions are also increasing in terms of with international studios, as also investments in learning and development to train talent is also growing, particularly with the work from home models evolving more and more. Organizations are also trying to see how to leverage and increase the quality of their workforce. A couple of other angles that we've also seen what this means from a longer term perspective is definitely leaner cost structures, as hybrid models will become a way of the world as we go forward. And also, I think what this also helps is the industry in India now has the ability to start reaching out and going deeper into the geography and demographics of India, and not necessarily focus on the large cities and towns for their talent pool. Work from home does offer opportunity for you to start looking at going wider into India's geography in terms of getting building your talent pool. Therefore, when you look at FY21, our sense is that the animation and VFX industry, animation will grow to about 16 billion rupees, with VFX at 33 billion. Both of them showing a growth over the previous period, on the back of pipelines getting restored, as well as organizations, both studios and delivery organizations, figuring out ways to work under the new norm. Can we go to the next slide, please? When we move on to the gaming segment, I just want to spend a couple of minutes to really define what is online gaming, right? And then the short answer is there are multiple ways to look at it. If you can look at it in terms of by platform. So you've got mobile gaming, PC and console gaming. In India, 91% of the gaming user base are actually mobile gamers, whereas in most developed markets is the reverse, with console and PC game having a very large and long history. If you look at by type of games, so you've got real money games, which is card, casual, online fantasy sports, non-real money games, which is largely your casual and other games. And you've got esports, which sort of acts as a underlying product which leverages on the existing gaming culture, as also taking it to the users in a competitive manner. When you look at genres, you've got hyper casual, casual, mid-core and hardcore games. And when you look at monetization models, so you've got free models, you've got freemium games, subscription and in-app purchase based games, and commission based games, right? So these are various ways to look at the cut of online gaming, and depending on the product, organizations could fit into any or more of these categories. When you look at the size of the online gaming market in India, we are about 134 billion rupees in FY21, with casual being largest in terms of 60 billion rupees, with RMG card and fantasy sports following. But what is interesting is when you compare, and we'll show that a little bit later, when you compare the casual market to the user base, predominantly most of the users are actually casual gamers. But when you compare that to the monetization, there is definitely a gap which needs to be filled as we move forward. And therefore, at an overall basis, the paid models sort of contribute about 97 billion rupees, and ad models contribute about 37 billion. Couple of points: that India is, in terms of the number of gamers, is actually the second largest in the world. But when it comes to size of the market as well as ARPU, we are actually significantly lower than most developed and even developing markets globally. What is interesting though is, while COVID-19, and this is a point I would like to make, is that gaming as a sector was growing even pre-pandemic, but the COVID-19 situation actually, triggered even a faster growth as we go forward. Where while there was a significant bump up during the lockdown periods, post-lockdown, when they normalized, user behavior, user engagement levels were all 15 to 20% higher than what they were, pre-pandemic. So we've sort of established a new normal, and that seems to be continuing its trajectory as we go forward. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what's been driving gaming growth, over the last few years and the last 18 months in particular, right? If you look at the demand side factors, I think one big change is there's a perception change that is starting to happen in terms of online gaming, and in terms of a positive trends around that. The second angle is that the user base on the digital side has been growing significantly, and there's a significant awareness growth that has happened among consumers on online payments and OTT platforms and social media, and greater time spent on mobile usage, particularly for entertainment purposes. So all of this together really has helped drive demand, and particularly when you start looking at some of the mid-core games and above, esports evolution in particular has again ensured that we are able to take some of these games out to the masses. And PUBG, in its erstwhile avatar and now Battlegrounds, is definitely is an example of how you can take the some of these mid-core games to a mass audience. On the supply side factors, there are 3 or 4 elements in terms of what kind of product changes and innovations are being made by the studios, which is actually enabling greater user engagement. Right? You're talking and some of these are revolve around multiplayer gaming, localized content, localized language content, social elements around gaming, and increased investments by global firms, as also an increase in the supply of game developers and titles. So so the supply side factors are equally contributing to the growth of gaming as a segment. Next slide, please. So when you step back a second, some of the key themes that are playing out in gaming, right? Like I mentioned earlier, widespread adoption of gaming as a means of entertainment. Lockdowns effectively meant that we are now operating at 15 to 20% above at a normal level, which is above that of the pre-pandemic era. When you look at monetization, as India's digital maturity increases, and I think that's a very important point that we should be making, is that while there is a need for a lot of excitement around gaming, comparisons with more developed markets, I think we need to be a little bit more circumspect about, because all those markets are far more digitally mature, as also have a very strong gaming culture through a history of PC and console gaming, both of which are fairly, and particularly the digital maturity in India is fairly nascent, and it's really 4 to 5 years of growth that we are starting to see, right? So as Indian users go up the maturity curve, we are definitely going to see a significant growth in monetization potential, particularly around IAP. Advertising, on the other hand, is expected to continue to be a significant source of revenue generation in India, as against most other markets. I think where we see a lot of potential for ad growth in India is around rewarded ads, which effectively offers the consumers the same value as IAPs, but without having to pay for it, right? And offers brands a captive audience in terms of what in terms of reaching out to the consumers. So monetization, we do see significant headroom for growth as we go forward. Um, on the distribution and platform side, I think what is interesting, for as we look ahead, is gaming being used to drive consumption and user engagement in across other digital platforms by telcos, e-commerce companies, edtech, food tech companies. A lot of these players are now looking at gamification and also gaming as a integral use case to sort of drive user engagement. The second angle, we are definitely expecting to see greater content supply at scale and at quality from India. And finally, multi-gaming platforms, and I'll talk about that in a bit, emerging, as we see now, and we expect that that's going to be a key play going forward. And because our sense is that multi-gaming platforms are uniquely suited to Indian sensibilities, where the ability for a user, particularly casual and hyper-casual users, to have multiple offerings in one place, adds a tremendous value for them. And from a platform perspective, it makes the user acquisition and retention far more efficient. So this is something we expect to see grow as we go forward. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges that online gaming is facing in India, like I mentioned at the beginning, lack of digital maturity is a challenge as it exists today. As we grow, along the maturity curve, this will hopefully be resolved. The lack of a console culture again is also a challenge, from a monetization perspective, particularly for IAPs. But again, we do expect that this will get rectified as we move forward. The other angle is that given that India is largely mobile driven, almost all the distribution of gaming in India happens through Google and Apple Play stores and App Store. And what that has meant is there is no real publisher at size that is available to build scale, right? And this has effectively meant that a lot of the studios have not been able to grow and scale up to compete with a lot of the global studios. But again, as the market grows and as the potential of the market grows, we do expect to see that Indian studios will be able to build scale, and not only that, also compete in global markets as we go forward. The couple of other angles is purchase price parity, is not consistently applied for IAP. Government support is again something that is absent from at least an overt support perspective. And when we come to real money games, again, that challenge becomes a little bit more starker, where there are definitely regulatory uncertainties that exist today around definitions of real money game of skill versus game of chance, which models are acceptable, which are not acceptable, which states accept real money games and which don't. All of this is undergoing significant uncertainty, and I think that regulatory clarity is important for the gaming industry to be able to build a sustainable future as we go forward. Pulling all this together, what does the outlook for gaming look like in India? Right. So we expect that the gaming user base will grow from 433 million in FY21 to 650 million plus in FY25. A market size of 290 billion from 134 billion today, growing at a CAGR of about 24%. What are some of the key themes which will drive this growth? I think there are some 3 or 4 key elements that we believe is going to make a fundamental difference as we go forward, right? I think one of the most key elements is the rise of esports as an underlying enabler for growth. And while esports has already been starting to see a lot of growth, it is still, limited in terms of the number of titles that are made available, and therefore limited by the demographics of users who are currently competing in these tournaments. As the market matures, we expect that there will be a greater number of depth in titles, and not just that, we expect to see greater number of Indian titles also coming in, a more widespread a wider spread of the types of games that get picked up for esports tournaments, all of which we believe will enable more number of users to participate in esports tournaments and follow esports tournaments, which again is going to have a symbiotic and a knock-on effect on user engagement and greater gameplay by these users. The other very key element that we expect to see growing, which will make a fundamental difference going forward, is cloud gaming. India, like I mentioned, has seen constrained growth of console and PC gaming in the past, and is fundamentally a mobile gaming market, and that has got to do a lot with device availability and device affordability as well. But as we go forward, our expectation is that when 5G in particular becomes available at scale, and this may be a while away, but when it does become available, we do expect that cloud gaming should actually be able to replace at scale the particularly for mid-core and hardcore games, and provide opportunities for wider and larger demographics of the Indian gaming universe to actually engage in some of these more complex and higher end games. Multi-gaming platform, we believe, is going to see greater traction in India as we go forward. The couple of other angles that I also wanted to mention is artificial intelligence, and leveraging artificial intelligence is going to be extremely critical and core to studios looking to build their games and looking to engage with users as they go forward. The ability to understand individual users' gameplay and tailor products to their needs will make a fundamental difference in user acquisition and retention. So therefore, when we pull this all together, where do we see some of the big changes that are likely to happen in the AVGC segment as we go forward, right? I think some of the key areas of demand are going to be definitely edtech. I think edtech as a segment is growing, significantly, and content, particularly when we start looking at gamified content, or when we start looking at content particularly for younger audiences, requirements for animation are definitely going to see a significant growth, and a lot of the demand in the future is likely to come from edtech. Similarly, when it comes to gamification of content itself, particularly around kids content, the whole convergence between animation, VFX, and gaming is something that we can expect to see more and more. And as games, particularly in Indian games, start becoming more and more complex, the requirement for animations and VFX skills are also likely to increase as we go forward. Another area is augmented and virtual reality adoption, which will again drive the growth for animation and VFX. But more importantly, not just within the media and entertainment sector, right? But wider sectors such as healthcare and defense are also likely to see demand for these skill sets. And finally, definitely we do see a need for AVGC parks, centers of excellence, which will enable studios to work together to scale up and to attract foreign presence and investments. So, as in terms of the role of the government as a change agent, I think there are a few areas, definitely something that is something that we should be thinking about. Like I mentioned, regulatory clarity around gaming, and in particular RMG and fantasy sports, is extremely critical. Implementation of AVGC schemes, which have been put out by the states to support studios and startups, that needs to be done. So while a number of states have come out with their schemes, we do believe there is a lag in implementation which needs to be addressed. Grants and subsidies, from the government in some form to provide a level playing field to the Indian studios, and also to help them and enable growth and support for them in their early stages. And finally, skill development and institutions, and to build skill sets, both not just on the technical side but also on the creative side, is extremely critical. And particularly given that this space of gaming, animation, and VFX is a techno-creative space, and it's not just adequate to build strong technical skill sets. The combination of technical and creative angles is extremely critical. So that, in a short manner, is basically a summary of what we see in the animation, VFX, and gaming space, both in terms of what's been happening over the last 18 months or so, but also more importantly, where do we see the sector headed, and what are likely to be some of the key drivers and change agents that will impact the sector as we go forward. Hope you found the segment useful, and thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Mr. Menon, for that very, very detailed and very comprehensive overview of AVGC industry. We'll definitely work with you and other members of the AVGC committee on preparing our formal recommendations to the government for the growth of this industry.